So I guess we'll jump right in. Keith, you describe yourself on social media as a loose cannon and a purveyor of medium suits, but you're also a self-described weather nerd. So tell us how weather became your passion.
Yeah, so for me, it started when I was 10 years old. Blizzard in 1993. Quick math. How old am I? There'll be a quiz. I was just really into that blizzard. I remember it shoveling out my driveway and whatnot. And then after that, I just kept liking weather. And my dad had one of those classic jobs that made a lot of money, but he hated. And so he was big on do something you like for a job. And so he was really nurturing to that. So he bothered local TV stations until they let me come in. Just badgered them. He still does. He'll still keep in touch with some of these guys in Boston who were there when I was a kid, And yeah, so it just took off from there, and it was maybe I can actually do this for a living. And so far, it has worked out.
And so since you knew from such a young age that you wanted to be in weather, what did you do to prepare yourself for that?
Well, so the funny thing is weather is a lot of math and physics. So I started to take AP classes in high school. So calculus, you wanted to go in at least at a decent calculus level. So I started doing that. And actually, I hated math. I was not a fan. But I knew I had to get there. In fact, when I went to college, a lot of people wanted to be weather people, but they didn't like math. And so we lost about 65% of our initial class. Because they liked clouds, but they didn't like calculus, and so it just didn't work out. So I started doing more of that, and then I kept a diary of weather, which girls loved in high school. They were like, "This is the best thing I've ever seen." So I was just in it as much as I could be.
And so you went to college in Vermont, and then afterwards, I was surprised to find out you didn't start in TV. So tell us what you did after college.
Yeah. So my first job was at a company in Massachusetts. It's now called the Weather Company. It was called WSI at the time, but it's owned by IBM. And so most meteorologists are behind the scenes. And people say it drives them insane. They go and they say, well, I'm a weatherman. They say, what station? No station. There's no station. So, Home Depot has meteorologists. American Airlines has meteorologists. So what we did there was aviation forecasting, energy forecasting. So for the equivalent of CMP, we did National Grid down in Massachusetts. So I did legitimate weather for a while before I started putting on makeup.
And how did you make that jump to TV?
This is actually a great story. So at the time, we had a small base of TV clients, and one of them was Fox News. So at the time, Fox News they had one meteorologist, Janice Dean, who's still there, but they freelanced the rest of their weather. And so the freelance pool was a couple of TV people, but it was 04, 05, hurricane season. It was out of control, and our guys were just run down, and we were out of people. So we put the guy who was the boss on one time, and he bombed. He was terrible. And so they're like, okay, what are we going to do? We got to get somebody else on. And so, I'm 23. And I'm like, I'll do it. And so they said, well, make a tape first. I made a little demo tape, sent it to Fox. They're like, all right, let's give it a shot. So that was my first live TV, was Fox News with Shepard Smith. And after that was not a disaster. They're like, well, all right, maybe you could have a career in this. And so I started putting a tape together after that, more or less.
And then you went to work in Burlington, Vermont?
Yeah, so then I had to get a local TV job, which is pretty hard, actually, especially when you're new. They just look at demo. I was literally sending tapes out, which makes me feel really old, but I would go and mail out a tape, and it would be a 3-minute reel. And news directors, and I know this now from experience because I'm involved in hiring people, we watch literally 5 seconds of someone. We're like, and hate their face, done. It's entertainment, or maybe the first shot is just a big mistake that people make in demo reels sometimes is their best story is not the best version of them, if that makes any sense. So like some of the demo reels we got, the weather was crazy, but you couldn't hear the person, or they weren't particularly doing a good job. Or so yeah, I had to send tapes out. I got a call from the chief meteorologist. His name's Tom Messner. He's still there. And he was like, I'm going to convince you to come here. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't have another offer anyway. So, but it was actually good because I knew Vermont pretty well. And Tom is still one of my best friends. And he was a great mentor because I wish I could show you the demo reel that I sent. It was so boring. It was like, I guess that guy did the weather. I don't know. Like, I'm not intrigued by it in any way. And Tom he's this really out there guy. He's the man in that market. And he taught me to bring myself out, So like I said, I still talk to him because he dragged me out of it.
And so after that, you came to Portland for your first stint at News Center. So tell us what's unique about Maine in your mind in terms of the weather here, but also the people that you're interacting with here.
I just think Mainers are authentic. They're just, there's not much passive aggressive behavior in Maine. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like I get emails that I'm like, I respect your honesty, although the contents of what you said is hurtful. But that's what I dig about Maine is like, people will just come up to you and just like, that suit's ridiculous. I'm like, all right, nice to meet you. But conversely, they tell you if they think you're doing a good job. And also, with Channel 6 particularly, is it's a legacy. Like I'm just riding the coattails of Pat and Bill, and so they got the station to where it is, and then I just snuck up behind them. And it's like you ever watch a football play where there's a fullback and he's running, and then there's a running back who's 5'5" behind him. That's me. Yeah. I'm like just gonna get behind them, and obviously Maine is beautiful as a state. I'm from Massachusetts, which is great. There's great parts of Massachusetts, but I think especially southern Maine is like Boston without the annoyance of the city. Like when people here talk about traffic, I'm like, so cute. And then in Maine being so varied, like I feel like you can take a vacation. We do in Maine. When I lived in Massachusetts, I didn't go on vacation in Massachusetts. Maybe the Cape occasionally, but like here, it's like let's just go to the central part of the state. It's a different world there, and I just think we went to Lubec recently, and I've never been there, and it literally did not feel like the same state at all. It almost isn't, but it's close.
So after a few years here, you had the Weather Channel came knocking. And you went down to Atlanta to work with them. But so how did they find you? How did that whole thing come about?
Yeah, it was actually super weird. I got an email. So I had a website like with a demo reel on it because Joe Kupel had been here for 875 years, and I wasn't sure if he was going to leave or what was going to happen. So I was like, I probably should look and see if there's another job for me. And so I get an email out of the blue. February or something, and said, "Hey, my name is David Clark. I'm president of the Weather Channel. I've seen your stuff. I'd love to get together." She said, "Get together." And I was like, "I don't know if this is a date or what's happening," but the answer is yes either way. So my first thought is I have some friends, and some of them are here tonight who would do that as a joke. So let's start there. So my first thought was like, I literally was like, could you fake a weather.com email address? Like, is that a thing I could just go and do online? Because my friends would do that. I determined the answer was no. So I met David Clark in New York City a couple months later, and we went to a bar. And he was like, "You're cool. I think we'll hire you." I'm like, "Okay." Then I didn't hear from him for 6 months, and I was like, "Oh, all right." So it was getting weird because Channel 6 was asking, "Are you going to resign?" I said, "Honestly, I don't know. Like, this is a pretty cool opportunity." And then they eventually came through. Turns out I found out when I got to the Weather Channel how they actually found me, because I'm thinking, why would the Weather Channel scout in Maine? So Bill Burke owns the Sea Dogs. He used to be the CEO of the Weather Channel. Bill Burke did. His brother runs NBC Universal. Long story short, he emailed the current CEO and said, hey, there's this guy up here you might want to take a look at. He emailed the president. He watched some random Saturday morning I worked where apparently I was less than terrible that day. And then but nobody told me any of this until I got down there. And he made it really creepy. The CEO was like, do you want to know how we found you? Yes, I do, actually. So that was it. So then I was down there.
So tell us about the experience of working for the Weather Channel and how it was different from the time that you spent on TV in Maine and in Vermont.
It was really interesting to me. Like, the first thing was the building, like the studio. The studio was probably 2 or 3 times the size of this area here. Whereas if you've ever been to Channel 6, and this is typical in local TV, even bigger markets, it is a closet. Like, the studio is very, very small and compact. So I walked in, and there's people that I watched since when I was a kid. You know, I loved the Weather Channel, of course, growing up as a kid. But it's a different ball game. Like, first and foremost, you are just a face. So here I forecast, I put together graphics, then I go on TV. There I went on TV. So we had a whole department that made the forecast, another department that made the graphics. I walked in, went to a makeup room, which we don't have in local TV either. They can actually do some miraculous things. At first I was skeptical. I was like, I don't need that much makeup then. And I was like, yeah, I guess I did actually. So this is the only time in my life that I didn't have these genetic eye bags. I don't know what they did. They just sprayed them right down. But anyways, I got on, that's it. I walked in, I knew what the weather was doing, but I didn't make a forecast, and I walked in and I delivered it. So it was a lot different, which for me was kind of a slight control problem, because I like to have the forecast. And then there was the travel, which was most common question people ask is, why did you come back? Or why did you leave the Weather Channel? It was that. It was the flying is cool unless you have to do it when somebody texts you, which is pretty much how it had to operate on a national level.
And so with all that travel, where did you have the opportunity to travel? What type of weather were you seeing that you hadn't experienced before?
Yeah, opportunity. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, opportunity. I mean, so that's what's interesting. I did see a lot of parts of the country I would never go to recreationally. So that was very cool. A lot. And actually, we used to rate that based on like the type of weather. So, okay, what season was the worst to travel? And it was severe weather season. Simply because it would happen in the middle of nowhere, and you would go and be like, I guess who needs to go to Kansas? You now. The tropics, at least the hurricane season was like the Southeast, it was Florida, or something like that. But no, you know what? Actually, the most surprising place I ever went was Alpena, Michigan. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but like it was shockingly cool. That whole area, and then Mackworth Island up there, like I actually want to go back there but I never would have gone there, but once I got up there, it was cool. Where else was surprisingly cool? Tulsa, Oklahoma. I felt like a real East Coast snob, but I was like, they have tall buildings. I did not know this. Like I didn't, Tulsa, when you think of Tulsa, you think of like Portland, but no, Tulsa has like skyscrapers and it was actually a pretty cool town. Weather-wise, everything. I mean, I had never chased tornadoes prior to that. My wife loved that. Big fan of me going out there and chasing tornadoes. The snow was old hat. I don't think I experienced a snowstorm that was any worse than anything we've gotten here. There was one lake effect situation in Buffalo where they got 7 feet. That was messed up. That was truly messed up. We literally, like, all our live trucks got buried. Like, we couldn't get out of the spot we were in. So we sent 5 crews and we were down to 1 by the end because everybody was like, well, I guess we're just going to be in this truck now. So that was pretty crazy. That was the only time that I felt like, have we made a poor decision about where we've located? Like, we're always safety first. Like, I never was concerned when we were doing tornadoes because we always put ourselves in the right position, blah, blah. But I've never seen it snow that long like that, and we just couldn't get out of there. Luckily, we were able to do hotels and stuff. That was pretty wild. And they sent me to Portland a lot too, actually.
Oh, did they?
We put Maine on the map for 3 years. Now it's back off the map.
Yeah.
But the Weather Channel never had really sent anybody up there. And they're like, oh, you know that place. Let's go up there. And they actually sent somebody else to Sugarloaf the first time. So they sent this guy, Paul Goodlow, good dude, to Sugarloaf. And his live shots were literally people, "Where's Keith?" And then after that, I went to Maine. But I had pointed that out to them. I was like, maybe I should go with Paul. I don't know. And they're like, no, he likes to ski. He'll go to Sugarloaf. I'm like, okay, I'm sure he does. But, so after that, I was here a few times.
How? What was the difference between the audiences for the Weather Channel and your audience here in Maine?
Transient. So the Weather Channel could pull on a big storm day a couple million people. I mean, what's the whole state of Maine? 1 million and change. So, and shockingly, not everybody's watching local news. But there were people, so for example, I had worked there for a year and a half, and I had my first Today Show hit, and I did it, and people from high school were like, I didn't know you did weather, because all of a sudden we hit all these people. And the same thing would happen with a hurricane. You would start getting inundated on Twitter or Facebook. Who's this new guy? You'd been there over a year, but nobody was watching. The baseline was lower. Channel 6, News Center Maine. They get really upset about that. News Center Maine. It shifts during the summer because everybody's out, so it lowers, but it's the same people who come back in the winter, so they're more familiar with you. Like, people don't email me about my suits anymore. They've given up. It's just like, it's not gonna happen. So, but there I would get, if in a big event, someone would be like, what is this guy wearing? You know, because it was the first time that they saw it. And I think we've all experienced that, where like maybe we don't watch politics and then it's election day. And you're like, well, what's this guy's deal? And he's been on TV for 7 years on that network, but you didn't watch it. So I think our main audience is a lot more consistent.
And what was it like for you to come home to Maine after that stint at the Weather Channel?
It was cool. You know, I really enjoyed it. It was weird. I've never moved to a place that I've lived before. You know what I mean? Like, we moved back to Portland, and I was like, I guess we're going to go back to our old gym. I think that's how it works. And Channel 6,
News Center.
Yes, thank you. I have all kinds of branding problems. So we have a whole department that brands. And for example, we're supposed to wear shirts that say News Center Maine on them when we're in live shots. And I wear like shirts with cactuses on them, and it drives them insane. So yes, thank you. It was interesting though to go back, and so some of the same people were at News Center, but there had been a lot of change in there too. And then Todd was here, and it used to be Joe. But otherwise, after a couple of weeks, it felt like it felt familiar to me, except I wasn't working weekend mornings anymore, which was advantageous to my life. But yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason I came back to 6 is, I think I can say 6 still, it's like the family aspect of it. Everybody's cool, although they're all quitting now. But Bill is such a short timer,
Right.
47 years, you couldn't have just rounded up,
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you felt like you were, following on the coattails of the dynasty. So what has it been like for you to be able to work with these people who, all of us have been watching on TV for many, many, many years? Yeah, I mean, it's, so Pat Callahan for a little while, when we were between bosses, was the acting boss. We call it news director, but it's boss. And he was invaluable because he had so much experience, and Pat is like, he's just a true professional anchor, which is kind of a lost art at this point. It's and then the weather aspect, I learned a lot from Koopa when he was still here, because he'd been here so long about what patterns are what, and then Bill, and I think it's good. It balances because we've got a lot of young people too, and they want to put up the most viral video and or they do like emoji polls. Those drive me insane, where it's like, do you like cats or dogs? It's like, well, okay. So you got a lot of clicks, but what are we giving people there? I'm not sure. So I kind of like that old school, like Rob Caldwell's like that, even though he's not as old. Rob has a bunch of leather-bound books on his desk. He's just like, he's in his zone, and he's that more traditional anchor and reporter. So I think there's a lot of value to it. Unfortunately, they don't want to work till they're 95. So we're tending to shed them over the past couple of years. Yeah. One thing I imagine that's changed a bit over the course of your career to this point is social media.
Yeah.
And I know you have big followings on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And so talk to us about the role that those play in your job and how you approach each of those platforms differently.
Yeah, I mean, they're different audiences, right? Like Twitter is instant and viral and kind of negative. Like Twitter is the most negative of those platforms. I get trolled on Twitter way harder than anywhere else. And it's by somebody who like all caps and they have no profile picture. And but it's more like, okay, here's the latest wind gust. So, it just gusted to 65. All right, like retweet off that. Facebook is the most organic. It's funny, for a while consultants were saying, oh, Facebook is dead, don't bother with them, blah, blah. And then they're like, wait, never mind, we changed our mind. Because they're tied to actual people. You know, in Twitter, you can make up any screen name you want. It doesn't really matter. So the engagements are authentic on Facebook. Like, for example, when Bill retired, Facebook was the most like, hey, I met Bill, 20 years ago. He was a really good dude or whatever. And then Instagram is just for shirtless pics, I think, mainly. It's more visual. Instagram is about my life. Like if I put a map on Instagram, people are like, oh, it's just, and actually I've gotten guidance from that. I think Jamie's here. This kid, Jamie Walter, who's he's a photographer, and I met him at Sugarloaf, and he was pretty big on Instagram, and I needed some guidance about like, how do I make Instagram work? Because I was doing it. I was putting maps up, and it's not what you do. So like, give me a picture of us skiing or of my boy Luca, who is adorable. Luca crushes on Instagram because he's just real cute, and I don't have to Photoshop him, so that really helps. But yeah, it's visual. It's a visual medium, and I think Facebook is a good dialogue place about storms. People have a lot of questions. People don't ask questions on Instagram. It's just, that's a cool picture. I'll say one thing about it and get out.
So one thing I wanted to talk about was climate change. This is an issue that you on social media and on air will talk about. And you're a little bit of an outlier in that. There are a lot of meteorologists who don't do that. So tell us about why that's an issue that you do engage with people on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know any meteorologist in this TV market who isn't on board with climate change. So it's not a matter of that. It's just a pain in the butt to deal with it. That's frankly what it comes down to. I mean, every time I put something up about it, like, hey, we just recorded our warmest month on record again, it's going to be 70% or 80% positive at first. And then what you'll see is the tide will turn and it'll start being more people who are like, this is a hoax. Why don't you ask Al Gore about it, blah, blah. And what happens is they've shared it on a climate deniers group. And so they'll flood your page. And this actually happened to me with flat earthers of all people. Of course, I did a video on flat earth. And of course, people were like, yeah, well, this is so stupid. I can't believe it. And all of a sudden it was like, maybe the Illuminati's got, I'm like, what is happening? And I realized they were all coming in, they weren't from Maine, they were just coming in from these other groups. And then eventually, I lost that battle on Facebook. It was like I was outnumbered. If you look at the comments, the earth is actually flat. So same thing with climate change. It's like a grouped up thing, and then they attack a page. But I think it's important still, one, I don't care what they say because it's not an opinion situation. And I think that's where we're at now is people are like, well, I don't care what you think. John Oliver had a great segment on climate change where it's like 38% of Americans don't believe in climate change. He goes, who gives a crap? Why do you ask them questions like, are there hats? There are. It doesn't matter, And so I think it's important as being a scientist that people see every day because most people aren't going to interact with another scientist. I watch History Channel and some nerdy TLC kind of stuff, although they don't do much actual science anymore. But most people are going to see one possible science representative a day, and it's going to be us, which is kind of scary. But it's our responsibility to just call it as it is. You don't even have to take a stance on what you're going to do about it, and I try not to. But it is what it is, right?
When you and I were talking recently, one of the things that was kind of surprising to me when we were talking about climate change is that your thinking on that has evolved over time. Yeah. So talk a little bit about early in your career and your kind of approach or your thoughts on it at the time and how that's changed to now.
Yeah, so this was pretty controversial when I put it on Facebook maybe a year ago, my Facebook memories reminded me, which that like 11 years prior, I was giving a talk on how climate change might not be real. And I gave it at Emerson College in Boston at the time. I gave a couple times, I had like a PowerPoint presentation. And so what happened here was I graduated college and I worked with a guy who is now one of the top climate deniers in the country. His name's Joseph DeLeo. And it's not like that's slander because he's up there like, hey, it's not real. And he's a really smart guy, older guy. He worked at WSI with me at the time. And he had some, what I thought were compelling arguments as to why this may not be real. And so he kind of won me over. He influenced me heavily at that time. Then I stopped working there, started reading the research myself, and was like, whoa, everything that he threw out there has already been countered. Like it's like straw man stuff. But yeah, there was a period of time, which I think is actually really important. People hate changing their minds so much. There's one thing I've learned about, climate change is like, you cannot drive at someone with a bunch of facts and expect them to be like, you're right, I'm wrong. Like, it's just not going to happen, especially men. Like, men are, statistically, it's true. Like, if you look at my Facebook, the deniers are like 89% male, and they're not going to come off it. So you have to give them an opening. I try to say like, all right, well, here's what's going on. I'm not telling you have to drive a hybrid right now, but like, let's agree this is real. Give them an out. Because if you just drive right at somebody like that, even if they're wrong and they know it, it's not going to happen. So it took me time to evolve and come around and be like, all right, that was the wrong position at the time.
And when you're having these conversations, and I know that there are times where you'll email or you'll even call people and talk with it, are there times where you kind of have to say, like, throw your hands up and say, all right, we're just done? Because you're just going in circles. How do you, how do those conversations go? Yeah.
To me, it's all about like the tone of it, or if somebody wants to, if they string together a bunch of websites that I know are just like ExxonMobil's old fraudulent, I'm just, that's a lost cause because you're not willing to even agree on information being information. I will call people, like not randomly, I don't just like call people, but I'll say like, hey, if you want to talk about this, like message me, I'll give you my office number. And I've done that a few times and it works pretty well because one, it doesn't give them time to look stuff up. The problem with this sounds really old, but the problem with the internet is you can Google anything you want to be true. So what people are doing is I'll throw a fact at them about heavy carbon and how that's how we know it's our fossil fuels. And they'll Google why heavy carbon doesn't mean it's our fossil fuels. You know what I mean? And they'll find some blog to link back to. I found the phone is really effective. In person is the best. I've told a few people, why don't you come in and we'll do a live debate on climate change. You don't get to have a phone or anything. We'll just do it. One guy actually said yes, which I was like, this is going to be awesome. And we made graphics and everything. We had a studio ready and shocker, he did not show up. But I thought it's almost like it's not to try to be arrogant. What I'm trying to get across is if you really think you're an expert at this topic, come and sit down and have this conversation. But if you know you couldn't do that, then maybe that says something about what you know about this, the depth of the knowledge on this topic, Do
people ever ask you about, when they care about climate change and they're concerned about that, what they can do about that?
My experience has been the people who ask that are already doing it. And I kind of have like a relatively middle of the road approach on that within reason. Like for example, I don't drive an electric car at this time. I try to keep it to cars that have 30 plus miles a gallon, and I don't drive that far. We have heat pumps at our house. Maine is not a wealthy state, so it's very difficult to tell everybody, get rid of your old furnace and go over to this, and while you're at it, spray foam. And, it's just like, what's the reality of the situation? How can we make this affordable for people? And, statistically speaking, Maine isn't the worst problem here in the world as far as what we're putting out. But everybody needs to do their part. But yeah, I think people who ask, most of them say, how can I do it in a way that isn't going to cost me $15,000 or whatever the case may be. And I think the simplest way for most people right now is if you have an old house, to just try to insulate it. Because I just did that we had a 1929 house we just renovated, just did the whole house for $4,000. And you'll make that back pretty quick. So I think that's more effective than hybrids are great, but they do take a while to repay themselves. And Teslas are awesome, but like, you know, if you're asking that question, you probably could afford to go hybrid at that point, you know.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and have you bring us behind the scenes and tell us a little bit about your job kind of off camera and, you know, what goes into doing what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, so weather's weird. I pretty much always know what's going on in the weather because my wife would badger me if not. She'll say stuff like, so it's going to rain the next 4 days? I'm like, where'd you get that? She's like, well, the app says it. It kills me. So I always kind of know what's going on when I go into it. And then it's just a matter of, you know, making a 7-day forecast. We do our own graphics, but it's pretty easy these days. And then it's all the other stuff I'm trying to do. Like I do a nightly science segment now, which is called Brain Drops. But let me just float this by you. What I wanted to name it, and marketing did not allow, was Talk Nerdy to Me. I was like, I feel like that's like a lot better than Brain Drops. We should have recorded that, like, see marketing. So a lot of my time now is not actually spent forecasting it because I know already what's going on. It's like updating stuff on our website, doing Brain Drops. I'm doing a segment right now, which is going to be like a 5 or 6 part segment on folklore, weather folklore, and like whether or not it's true. So we're going to rate it like false, half true, or like totally dead on. So I spent a lot of time doing special projects, which I have a luxury of because my shift is in the middle of the day. Todd, he gets up at whatever time, I don't know, 2 a.m, and just does not have time for any of that stuff. So it's become kind of my thing to expand the weather into the science. And I just don't ask too. Like at this point, I just do stories. I'm like, guess what we're running today? All right, you know. As long as it's science based, they've tended to let it go.
And you seem kind of pride yourself on pushing boundaries a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, does that ever? Have there been times where that's gotten you in any trouble at work? Or?
Oh yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So our general manager's on the 4th floor, top floor. Good guy. I've been up there a few times, and the thing we like joke about it. Like, so when Pat Callahan took over the interim news director job, his one request was, please don't get me in a 4th floor corporate battle in the time that I'm interim news director. And I adhered to that. It's over stuff like, Twitter sometimes. It's usually corporate will come down and say, hey, you can't say that. We had a situation with a climate denier guy who said something, and then I clicked on his blog, and it was all a bunch of racist stuff, like blatantly just in between the climate change. It was like, he said, why don't you have me in a debate? And I said, I think I'll find someone who's not racist. So this guy got all upset. I'm gonna sue the station, blah, blah. And so corporate came down. I said, remember, it's not libel if it's true. You know, like this is unequivocally true. And at the time, their stance was, you will apologize to this guy. And I said, it's not going to happen. And so that's the line we drew. And luckily, my station ended up having my back. And we just kind of said to corporate, we're not apologizing to this guy. Do what you will. And what they did was nothing. And so we just kind of moved on from there. But it was definitely like, this is one of those situations. I'm in the meeting and I said, I think I know what I want to say, but let me just call my wife real quick. And so I call my wife and I'm like, here's the situation, blah, blah. I called this guy this. And she's like, nah, screw him. And so I'm like, all right, perfect. And but, you know, in general, they've been very supportive. It's usually something where maybe if there's an advertiser, that's another thing that can get kind of messy. If you say something about an advertiser, which I tend not to, but I also don't know every advertiser that we have. So we've had a situation 1 or 2 like that. Still here at the moment, but I mean, what's tough about it is, and I try to remind management about this, is you can't ask for someone to be edgy and then get annoyed when they're edgy. You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of you have to roll with it a little bit within reason. I'm never going to say anything horrible because I don't have anything horrible up there. You know, well maybe I do, but you know what I mean. It's not going to come out and be something indefensible. But you can't say push the limits, push the boundaries, push science, and then but not there. You know, it's hard to operate that way.
What are some of your more memorable on-camera moments?
Hey, that's a good question. Okay, so this is a good one because this is the most annoyed I've ever been on air. I was actually working for the Weather Channel. I was standing down on the dock next to the flatbread pizza down there. It was 6 below and snowing, which is pretty unusual along the coast. And the Weather Channel sent me because it was so unusual. Oh, super cold. And so NECN was like, hey, we want some hits from you while you're here. And I'm like, yeah, sure. We did that kind of thing. And they're like, you're going to be up after this commercial break. So I'm like, all right, good. And then they you can hear the anchors, bantering. They're like, all right, coming up, a blind guy who bowls. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not. And it keeps going. 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 minutes. And I'm like, hey guys, are we going to do this? Because it was really, really cold. And it's the only diva time I've ever had. After 25 minutes, we called the studio, they didn't respond. I was like, guess what? I'm out. And that was the end of that. But as far as on air, I ran into Jim Cantore came here for a snowstorm, and he didn't tell me where his live position was. And I walked down on Commercial Street, and there he was just standing out there. And he's like, why don't you just come on the air with us? I'm like, all right. So that was a lot of fun. I don't think the Weather Channel actually enjoyed that too much after the fact. Thought we got rid of this guy. Windstorm, 2 windstorms, 2017, Bug Light. We did a live shot out there, and we got up to about 65 miles an hour. That was fun. That was a good time. I was so unimpressed by the wind. See, this is what happens. 3 years on the road, going to every piece of weather you can find. And then we were doing that live shot. It was 45 or 50, which is good. It's good wind. And they were coming to me. I'm like, bored. Let's see. And then we finally got one that mixed down and really hit it. I'm like, that's it. And then everybody's power went out for a week,
And you've touched on it a little bit, but who are your mentors, the people who've influenced you the most since you were a kid and interested in weather? So
this guy, David Brown, who's used to be in Boston. He worked at CVB for years morning. He was the first guy who brought me to studio, showed me. He actually wasn't a meteorologist. He was an anchor who learned to be a weather person. But he was just so helpful all the way through college. And then Tom Messner taught me how to just be myself, which you may regret that decision. And then Jim Cantore still. Jim, when I met Jim the first time working at the Weather Channel, he was, a superstar in weather to me. And even though he's become a friend of mine, he's still a mentor. If he tells me to do something different, I definitely listen to it. And he was actually the guy who gave me some support about leaving the Weather Channel. I said, you've been doing this a long time. You've been on the road a long time. Am I crazy to not want to do this? Am I crazy to want to get off this kind of spotlight? And he said, no, man, I should have done it earlier. I should have done it, but now I'm addicted to it. I travel everywhere. And so he was really supportive. He's like, do what you want to do. Because don't think there isn't a lot of backtalk in the weather industry. Oh, you went from national back down to market 80. Oh, you must have got canned, So I knew when I decided to come back that I would have to listen to and not care what people might say about that transition kind of back. And Todd did the same thing coming from Boston, But you're happy you're here? Yeah, except for Todd. It's great. Right. He's obviously, everybody can tell he's the worst,
right.
Just from there.
So you're a pretty open book, and I think probably a lot of people feel like they know you pretty well. But is there anything about you that people would be surprised to know? Or?
I am between a DIYer and a legitimate handyman. I've really come along in my home improvement. And it really weirds people out because they don't see me as a type. And I think so there's a lot of people who drive trucks and wouldn't know what an impact driver is, right? It's like a style. I drive a truck. All right. I drive a Buick, but I will tackle almost anything. We just did a gut job renovation where we tried to hire out most of it. And we had a situation where the guy left in the middle, so we ended up finishing a lot of it. So I'm legitimately doing what I call covert projects. So I don't ask my wife because she thinks we don't have time for it. So the other day I started ripping out the trim on the exterior of the house, and I had a flashing tape that I'm doing. She's like, what are you doing out there? Luca's napping. I'm nothing. And then he wakes up from the nap, and I'm like, nail gun, things I know I can do when he's up. So that would probably surprise people because it's not really. And the other thing is that I play drums fairly well. I haven't played in a while because I've lived in condos, and it's like the ultimate jerk move to have a drum set. But I might bring it back now.
I wish I'd known we could have had drums here for you.
Yeah, no, that would have been entertaining. Well, there was an ad that was a mistake, and nobody's willing to take credit for it, but it said I was going to do salsa music tonight.
It's not too late.
Yeah, and so I was like, I hope everyone's not there for that. But 207 had me play for them one time because they didn't know I played either, and then they were like trying to call my bluff on it. They're like, oh yeah, okay, here's some sticks, I might bring that back. I'm trying to bring the dad basement back. I'm thinking about like wood paneling, a drum set, a carpet, something like that.
So you mentioned Luca. That's one thing that's changed, big change in your life since you came back here to Maine.
Yeah.
So to talk about that transition to fatherhood and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, he's awesome. My take on it, I can honestly say, and my wife would back me up in this, I don't think I've been flustered one day having him because, here's my take on it. You know how many idiots raise kids? Like, just people you're like, man, their kid turned out great, and they don't know what the heck they're doing at all. So that was my mentality the whole time. It's like, we're fairly intelligent people. I'm sure we'll be fine. Let's just not overthink it. So we have that slight, like, not old school, but maybe a little bit. Like, we went to a couple of daycares where they're like, we don't say no to the children because we think it's bad for their development. I was like, yep, see you later. So I'm not doing that. So, and it's not like this kid's marching around. He's a toddler. He's going to have a great, kid life. But we do have that idea of like, all right, man, we've been together 10 years. So like you're the addition. So come to Target with us and come in and of course my mom is not on board with any of this. She just does her grandma thing, and that's the end of that. But it's only one day a week, so she can only mess it up so much in one day. Yeah.
So speaking of your mom, you said she's local now, and she watches you on the news. So
yeah,
what is that like?
It's terrible. Yeah. It's terrible. So my mom, like, somehow I've been able to have this career where I got a national job and came back here, got a good job. But every time I say something, my mom's like, careful, you don't want to get in trouble. I'm like, Mom, I'm okay. I'm doing this. I think the real motivation is she doesn't want to move again. She knows if I get canned that she's got to move somewhere else. But yeah, no, she is. In fact, if I take a day off without telling her, she'll call me. She'd be like, everybody okay? That's her way to get in. Everybody okay? I didn't see you on the new news. I'm like, yeah, I took a day off. I'm sorry. Should I sync it to your phone or,
It'd probably be a good thing.
Yeah. And the funny thing is she was never that mom. Like, she was never that intrusive mom, but somehow here, like, she wants to know what's up, So now I run it by Gutner first and then her. So this is gonna work for your schedule. All right, good.
Well, we have time for some audience questions. So Molly's going to be walking around. So if you guys have questions, wait for the microphone, but ask away.
All right up front first. On the national weather, or Al Roker you mentioned, or whatever, they never, when they're giving the news of New England, or this big storm coming, whatever, they never go beyond Boston. They never mention Maine.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's why I joked earlier. I put it on the map for 3 years. I mean, I don't have a great defense for it. I mean, I think they just focus on it's myopic in New York, and even Boston to them is like a place you go on vacation to go north. Yeah, I've tried. I mean, well, Al's used to say Bangor wrong, and I would get these emails, hey, tell Al to say Bangor right. I was like, I'll be sure to do that on my first day here. Hey, Al. But yeah, it's a hard battle. It's like they certainly won't cover Maine weather if we're the only ones being hit by it, and it's just a straight like population algorithm for them, unfortunately. And so I did, like I said, I got the Weather Channel to push north. But then as soon as I left, they kind of snapped back. I mean, I think Jim's been back here once. I think that's been about it. Yeah, I mean, it's, conversely, I'm sure people in North Dakota are like, we're up here too. It's just these more rural states, they don't move the meter enough for them on the national ratings game for them to bother. But it is a bummer. And I did try to correct Bangor, but I think he's gone back from what I've heard. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. First is, why do the weather people have to stand waist deep in water to prove that it's raining out? And the second question, did you ever consider a career in comedy?
Yeah. No, let me start with the second one, which is it's a relative thing. Like, I'm funny for a weather person, but I'm not funny for a comedian. And I actually have a friend who has a show on IFC. It's a comedy show. And he sends me stuff, and I send him stuff like promos we're going to do. I've tried to do promos on Channel 6 that you wouldn't believe, and they've gotten shut down. But eventually, we're going to get one out there. What was your first question?
Where's David Warren?
Oh, well, because people hate watch it. So everybody says that. They're like, why do you guys have to stand in the snow with 6 crews for Storm Center? Then we get the ratings for Storm Center, and they're really good. So I personally like it. I like standing out, not in the rain, but if it's going to be really windy or really snowy, like we made it our mission to get, so the reporters go stand by the road and say things like the roads are greasy. But I want to go in the worst band in the state that I can find of snow and stand there. And so that to me is what fun. But yeah, unfortunately, like, it's a business. So at the end of the day, people say they don't like it, yet the ratings show that they do enjoy watching it from their couch. I don't know. Reporters, I kind of wish it would be like a volunteer basis. Like, I don't think we should send a reporter out that doesn't want to go stand in the snow. But they do. They go. They get assigned. So.
More quick there.
On one of your recent shows, you were talking about the storm with all the winds, I think 2 storms ago, and you compared Maine to Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And you said that they had higher winds, but they didn't have the damage. But I didn't hear your whole story, so I wonder if you'd repeat it. Yeah, that's true. Well, there's a number of reasons for that. But yeah, their power grids are a lot more resilient. So the last couple of years have made me very concerned about our power grid. We're obviously rural, so we're going to have a lot of trees. But 62 miles an hour is what we did 2 weeks ago. I mean, it really shouldn't be enough to knock out 200,000 people, because you think about like a lowest end hurricane is 74 miles an hour sustained, not gust. And we gusted to 62 once and everybody's power is out. And so I don't know what the right solution is, because conservation-wise, do we want to trim all the trees back from the lines? I don't think people would be really happy with that. But Massachusetts, their biggest advantage, other than, yes, they have some underground lines, they're just faster at restoring power. I think that's the problem. Like, I don't think anybody, CMP's spokesperson had recently retired, but I talked to her about, like, I don't think people don't expect the power to go out, but I think maybe they expect a faster response. And so in Massachusetts, they had wind gusts 90 miles an hour over the Cape. They had 220,000 out, but within a day, it was pretty much down to, a couple thousand. Meanwhile, it was about 3 days for us. Some of that has to do with the density of the grid, but our grid is really vulnerable. Like, I've thought, if we just get a Cat 1, I mean, we're going to be out for weeks. There's no way we're going to be able to get back up from that, which is, and this is an ad for Generac, by the way. Get one installed, only $5,000. Yeah.
Yes, I'm wondering why, not just your station, but every station I listen to, nobody wants to tell us what the weather is heading to Boston. Mm-hmm. There's so many people from this area who go to Boston every day, but there's never a weather forecast of what's going to be there. Any reason for that?
Not really. I mean, there's not a directive that says not to do that. I think it just has to do with the fact that local news has had to collapse its sphere to be hyper-local in order to be relevant. Like, consultants will tell you not to talk about the weather, even if there's something really cool going on in Colorado. They say local viewers don't care. And I think it depends. If there's cool video, they care. So I think the same thing happens. We kind of pass the torch at Portsmouth because we assume, well, Boston will cover it, down to the south of that. I'm not opposed to it. I just think our whole job is kind of like, how good can we be locally? And there is a little tinge of a lot of Mainers don't like Boston. I mean, it's not a huge factor, but I mean, Southern Maine is different, right, in that way, because a lot of people are from Massachusetts or they go there a lot. But you don't have to go that far north before people are not generally fans of. Because whenever we run stories about Boston, we do get actually some of that kind of Like if I wanted to hear about that, I'd go down there. So yeah, in short, it's just we're supposed to be super local, and so I think unfortunately in your case it stops at Portsmouth, and then you'd have to look at Boston to get the rest of it.
Questions in the back.
Hey Keith, congratulations for the sellout crowd tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
You see those commercials. I think you see the Sugarloafer since 1989.
Yeah.
I've been like a Keith Carson since like summer of 2019.
Yeah. Recent. Yeah.
So we've been following you. Here's my question that's intrigued me is I'm a dedicated follower of you with a CHS or a news center. It seems like it's almost like The Price is Right, where when these snowfalls come into play, that 6, 8, 13, nobody ever agrees with each other. So is it kind of like you come in 3 to 5 inches, and Lepresky comes on 13 like 5.1 to 7. I mean, I just assume you guys are all getting the same information, maybe from the gray weather situation. I mean, what causes these snowfalls? How come you guys just don't always collaborate, or do you?
This differentiation,
Thanks.
Yeah. First of all, this is Troy Wilkins, everyone. He's my realtor and friend. So he's if you need to buy or sell a house. No, that's actually a good question though, which shocks me. It's okay. I can do it from here. He's 6'7", only in the back. No, you know what? Actually, people do ask that a lot. Like, how do you come up with different numbers, the same information? It's experience. So you use the same models, but how we interpret them is part of our job. So for me, for example, I will never short the Sebago Lake area in snow ever again, because no matter what the models tell you, they'll say, oh, well, Wells is going to get the most amount. I'm like, nope. Sebago Lake. And pretty much every time it's Sebago Lake. And the other thing is, how risky do you want to be? So I will forecast earlier than a lot of people do. And then I force them to forecast, which like Channel 13, Charlie will tell me that, like, okay, if you put a map out, my news director is going to say, they have one out. So sometimes I do it just to mess with them. Just put it out there early. It's a risk-reward situation. But yeah, I think a lot of it is you take the storm and you say, have I seen a storm like that before? That's really important too, like analogs. Like, okay, I've seen one just like this, came over Boston, same strength. Why would it suddenly be warmer? That kind of thing. And there's some things that we just know happen. Like if you don't get a low way offshore, Portland, up to the mid-coast, they're going to flip back and forth between rain and snow. And so you have to build that in. So shave a few inches off them, because that's going to be a bunch of crust, and then it's going to come down. And there's a psychology to it too. So ski areas, mountains, will never underreport, ever. So if the mountains look like you get a good storm, you put 12 to 18, they get 10, they're calling in 16. It doesn't matter. So you're like, whatever, we'll get it from them. Along the coastline is like the most viewed, populated. So you really try to drill that down and get that as right as you can. But I like to point out, snow is interesting. People get upset. You said 4 and I got 7. Okay, so it's 10 inches of snow for every 1 inch of rain, all else being equal. Would you care if you got 0.7 inches of rain versus 0.4? Because it's the same thing. Trying to forecast to that level is the same thing. It's just that winter is your big, is like our big show time. Thank you, Troy, for that question.
Yeah, the other night you mentioned Hurricane Sandy, and you mentioned the European model. For several years ago, I read that the European model was better than anything we have. Have we caught up? And if not, why not?
Yeah, that's true. We have not caught up yet, but we're catching up, mainly because TV meteorologists are shaming the American model. So the American model is the GFS model, and the European was better because they put more money into it. That's it. I mean, you can't go online and get the European model for free. And so you pay for it, and then they put that money back into the model, and it just keeps cycling. So it's been much, much better. The Euro is like, if I have to put money on something, that's it. But yes, so NOAA decided to spend more money to develop the GFS to get it closer. And so they just released a new version of it last November that is better. But the problem with the GFS, the American model still is, it's not consistent run to run, and that makes you not trust it, right? Like it went so this wind event that's coming up on Thursday night, it had I think about a 70 mile per hour wind yesterday, and now today it's down to 45 and it's all offshore. And whereas the euro will kind of incrementally wobble. Okay, well, it's 65, now it's 62. Now, and it's just more trustworthy because it stays in that same, it refines, it doesn't change. And the GFS will just kind of jump back and forth. And our biggest problem is just computing power. That's it. Like, we know more about the atmosphere than we're putting in computer models. So we could be a lot closer all the time if the computers could solve the equations in time to spit it back out. And so that's what our limiter is. It's not knowledge of the atmosphere. It's how quickly can we get that information in, project it into the future, get it out, and we need to do it in a couple hours. And right now, we have to simplify all these equations just to get it back in time to use it. So I think it was somebody just said they did some quantum computing, Google. And my first thought was like, if they can get this to work, it'll change weather forecasting. It'll make it so much more accurate.
I really enjoy your, sorry, over here.
Okay, so
Moved over here. Your occasional blogs on the Sugarloaf website, your weather blogs. And I had two questions. One was, had you considered a career in humor weather writing? But that's already been discussed. And the other is, what's in store this year? Can you give a bit of a short-term or long-term forecast for the mountains? For us snow lovers.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm in it. Seasonal forecasting is not accurate. So like 10 to 15 days is as far as I would go with, and that would be mainly with temperatures. Like, I could tell you that after this week, it looks pretty cold, potentially really cold. But seasonal forecasts, even the best seasonal forecasters, some of which worked at WSI when I was there, they would be 60% skill level, which means 10% better than like flip a coin. So no, we look for El Nino and La Nina, and there's nothing that jumps out this year as saying it's going to be crazy one way or another. So no, I think it probably is most likely just going to be just a normal winter. The problem too is one big storm changes the whole stats. Like, was it the one we had? They named it Nemo, but it was our biggest snow in Portland. It was 33 inches. The rest of that winter wasn't really that big, but you get 33 inches in one shot, and now you've got an above average winter. Conversely, I thought last year we ended up about average or a little bit above, but every time it snowed along the coast, it rained after. So we didn't actually have that much snow pack on the ground, whereas the mountains actually had a pretty good year, I felt. But yeah, unfortunately, I hate to say it because but seasonal forecasting is just, it's not a very accurate game. So, I mean, it'll snow at Sugarloaf and it'll be 35 below at some point. So I went snowcat skiing on a day that the wind chill was minus 34 and it was promotional. They're like, hey, we'll take you out in the snowcat. So I text them in the morning, like, we still doing the snowcat? And they're like, yep. I'm like, oh, all right, okay. So I had to go out in that. It was just the right clothing, I guess.
All right, another question in the back. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So not to make it a little bit more serious in here, but this is a climate change question. So looking at the severe weather that we're seeing recently, like the significant hurricanes in the Caribbean and the wildfires in California, have we had, like, looking back over the decades, have we had periods of weather like this before, or are these really thought to be due to climate change? And as a weather forecaster, how does this change the way you look sort of at the weather and patterns in the future?
Well, I think the first question is interesting. It's hard to say. So we have good temperature records back to about 1880 or so. Weather records are harder because they were almost like hyperbole at one point. A big gale blew in from the east. Okay, like, what was that? So our severe weather tracking is fuzzier, especially 1800s to about World War II, because it wasn't all automated and it wasn't standardized. Okay, you're going to go out at 51 past the hour and report the conditions and then measure the snow. And the other thing I would say is that there's no doubt that that warming the globe is going to create more hurricanes or tropical storms, more available energy in the ocean. But I'm always very careful to tie individual weather events to climate change specifically, and it's for one really simple reason. Don't open a door in an argument that you don't want somebody else to walk through. What I mean by that is, if you start saying, okay, well, it was like these thunderstorms were really strong, maybe it was climate change. Well, then when it's minus 17, guess what you're going to hear? You're going to hear, well, where's climate change now? So I try to look at it as a long track situation. Even a year doesn't, 10 years doesn't really mean that much. Although certainly you can see the last 10 years have just been fire. I mean, we've just been super warm. But I think you have to be careful. And I think that's actually a weakness in the not the argument, but the way it's put out in public is sometimes producers will tie weather events to it on national news. And you're like, I wouldn't have done that. And it's not nefarious. They just don't quite know. So we will have more tropical systems, and they should be stronger because of the available energy. But that can have weird unintended side effects like more snow. That seems counterintuitive, but if it's still cold enough to snow during the winter, that's not going to change anytime soon. And if there's more energy in the ocean, guess what? That turns into more snow. That seems like a weird argument for climate change, right? And so I think you just have to be careful with how you do it. As you can see, I have a lot of psychology into how to win arguments.
Well, thank you for your time tonight and coming out and giving us this window into what it's like to be a weatherman, which is fascinating. And you touched on this a little bit with a previous question about the limiting factor with computer models and their speed with crunching numbers. But today, how much of your forecast is your own intuition and experience versus what you get from the computer?
Kind of depends on the pattern. So like during the summer, if it's high pressure and quiet, you can let the model take the wheel, so to speak. I mean, this spits out high and low temperatures, and within reason, they're going to be close. And it's mainly big events, snowstorms. Even the wind event is actually a good example. So the wind event that we had, like I said, we gusted 62 or 63, something like that. The European models, 10-meter winds, which is as far down as they're going to the atmosphere, had 90-something miles an hour, which we were just like, that's just not going to happen. And we knew that bias from that model, that it wants to pump out these really big wind gusts. So yeah, I mean, I'd say during the summer, we can let it cruise a little bit more. And then during the winter and the shoulder seasons like this, you have to say what's reasonable. Sometimes models will come into like 4.5-inch rain bullseyes out of nowhere. And so you have to dismiss that. So yeah, it's about knowing the biases. Like the European models are very good synoptic, big scale, here's where the storm's going to be. But I wouldn't take the snowfall, like some skiers and snowboarders are real big weather weenies when it comes to snow. And they will take the European model forecast and be like, this is what's going to happen. And sometimes it's really wild. Like it'll say in the mountains, 48 inches of snow. It's not going to happen. And what it's doing there is just taking the temperature, saying, it's going to be really cold, so it's going to be fluffed up, up to 48 inches. And so there is a lot of having to be skeptical. And there's some models that are just not good. Like there's a NAM model. It's called the NAM. It's just trash. It's just garbage. So we look at it sometimes out of curiosity, or like a tiebreaker. Like, all right, GFS and the Euro are really at odds. What's the NAM? It's almost a joke. It is a joke. We're like, what's the NAM got to say today? And we'll just see which way it tilts. But the computing power is going to be big, and no doubt, in the next 10 years, we're going to. The stat that really struck me is our 5-day forecast now is as good as our 3-day forecast was 15 years ago, which is a big leap in that amount of time. And I think there's no question that we're going to consistently do good 10-day forecasts within the next 10 years, ones you can actually plan by.
All right, last question for the night.
Good grief.
A lot of pressure.
So sorry, I'm from Massachusetts, but I do come to Maine in the summer.
Yeah, so you're okay.
Yeah, I'm okay. So back to the last big storm. So we're in Woods Hole on the Cape, and lost power, lots of trees, and we had a bomb cyclone that we were told what the heck is that? I read about it in the paper, but I'd like your explanation.
So this is, So all this weather slang has gotten a little crazy. Like the polar vortex is another one of those where, like, it is a thing, yet now it's too much of a thing. You know, like it was something that people only in synoptic meteorology and people who are doing mid-range forecasts would mention it, like, oh, low, the polar vortex is going to break up, blah, blah, blah. But then as soon as it hit, it was really sensational and people liked it and it worked. Same thing with bomb cyclone. So bombogenesis is a meteorological term, which is rapid strengthening of a low pressure system. It has to drop by 24 millibars in 24 hours or less. So that's bombogenesis. And so we would say sometimes this storm's going to bomb out. And then somehow cyclone got added to that. And again, it's dicey because it's technically right. So we actually had this argument at the Weather Channel when I was there. All of a sudden they wanted to call this tropical system a cyclone. And the head meteorologist is like, well, it is a cyclone because it's rotating that direction. And I said, yeah, but we don't use that term in this hemisphere. That's a southern hemisphere term. So they use cyclone and anticyclone in the southern hemisphere. But they're like, well, it's technically right. I'm like, yeah, all right. But the reason that we were doing it is because it had a ring to it. Cyclone approaches the U.S. is a lot scarier than a low approaches the U.S. So that's it. That's really it. I mean, so you won't catch me with that. Like, I don't know. I totally get it. And again, it goes back to, and this is no knock on producers and whatever, but they're news people. And then they're writing headlines, scripts about weather. And sometimes I'll get in our weather scripts and hold on a second. You know, I'll remove words. The other day when we had the king tide, the headline was like severe flooding in southern Maine. And I just like, delete severe. You know, so sometimes it's on the weather person to get in there and just say like, wait a second, we're not going to do that. So you won't see it on our station unless Todd's doing it before I get up, but I don't think so.
Well, Keith, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a great night.
Yeah.
And that this rain stops.